A women's rights commission in Bangladesh has proposed reforms to Bangladesh's interim government, calling for the criminalisation of marital rape and equal rights for women, regardless of religion and ethnicity. These plans have met resistance from Islamic organisations who've taken to the streets of the capital, Dhaka.
They are relentless in their demands. One by one, in emotionally charged speeches, they are denouncing reforms that Bangladeshi women say will finally grant them equal rights. Hifazat-e-Islami, a coalition of Islamic groups, wants to disband the Women's Affairs Reform Commission that has proposed, among many reforms, women's right to inheritance, an increase in women's parliamentary representation and protection of sex workers. But the religious group sees the proposed changes as targeting Islamic values.
You are mocking Allah's law. You have not been given that right. These women's rights contradict the Quran and Hadith directly. Secondly, this is a conspiracy to destroy the long-standing family and social bonds rooted in Bangladesh's traditions, culture, and civilizations.
Women's rights activists say the proposed reforms are in line with the Bangladesh Constitution's fundamental principles of democracy and secularism. And the women are not backing down. At this protest, they claimed the Women's Rights Commission and its proposed reforms are being unfairly targeted.
We will not hand this country over to fundamentalists. The people of Bangladesh are religious. But the so-called religious extremists are playing politics in the name of religion. And the main instigating issue of this politics is women.
The government says the opposition to reforms is politically motivated and the state is open for dialogue.
This hue and cry was much more political because of the fact that we had, a regime was thrown out before the interim government took over. So there are those who turn everything into a political issue to destabilize the country, to create chaos.
Bangladesh's constitution is secular, but for decades, Islamists in the Muslim-majority country have tried to influence social and political affairs. These women say they are determined to not bow down to attacks on their rights.
Well, Sara Hossain is a barrister in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh and specialises in women's rights. It's fantastic to have you with us, Ms. Hossain. Before we get into the legal aspect of things, how explosive is the issue portrayed in our report?
I mean, it's a critical issue, obviously. I think we've just come through we're in the middle of a massive transition from an autocratic government which collapsed on the 5th of August last year, and where we saw massive repression of human rights for many years, ending with these appalling atrocities of the killing of 1,400 people, as the UN found. So we're going through very, very difficult and challenging times, and it led with the spirit of eliminating discrimination and establishing equality. So it's ironic that now Islamists actually are standing against women's equality, which I think was very much, because women were very much part of this movement that saw the change of government last year. It's a critical issue. Equality and elimination of discrimination are absolutely critical issues and that are foundational to Bangladesh and that emerged very much in the course of our liberation war over 50 years ago and that were embedded in our constitution at that time. So there are things that women and men have been fighting for equality in Bangladesh for many decades now. This is not a new struggle.
Women, as you say, played a critical role in getting us to this point. How far along are the reforms proposed by the Women's Affairs Reform Commission?
The Women's Affairs Reform Commission is one of several commissions which have made recommendations to the government. All of these recommendations are currently under consideration. The government has been having parleys with various political parties around some of the recommendations, not yet, we understand, on the women's reform Reform Commission's recommendations, but they are being discussed in public. And although you've highlighted the responses of resistance and rejection from some of the Islamist groups, there are many other groups that have been very much welcoming of these recommendations. So I think what's important is to start taking them up and looking at those that are actionable and moving forward with those.
I know it's crystal balling, but I have to ask, do you expect the government to pass them in light of this opposition and, in fact, both parties to this fight?
Well, there's a huge number of recommendations. It's a 300-plus page report. As with all of the other recommendations from all of the other reform commissions, they're all very much under consideration. So I think we can't anticipate exactly what will pass and when. There's also the question, this is an interim government. There will be another government which will be coming in after elections. So the important thing, I think, is to develop political consensus and agreement and move forward. It's important that women have spoken out through this commission report. It's a whole range of recommendations from the immediately actionable to the long term, but they've created a space for us to discuss and debate and to move forward. And move forward we must. We're not moving back, that's for sure.
Sara, one of the demands is the criminalisation of marital rape. Currently, do women who are victims of marital rape have any protection at all?
Actually, they do have protection already under the law. Even the colonial era criminal laws that we have in place do recognize marital rape, but only up to a certain age, because at that time in the Victorian era, child marriage was recognized. And so rape in the context of child marriages was actually recognized already in our criminal law. And our domestic violence laws, which were passed in 2010, they also recognize sexual violence in the context of marriage. So actually, I think a lot of the demands that are being raised by these groups that are rejecting the women's reform recommendations are perhaps not fully aware of what our legal framework already allows.
Does the argument of opponents that these demands, Sara, contradict Islam have any footing in Bangladesh's legal system?
Well, Bangladesh's legal system is governed by the Constitution, which is our supreme law, which was promulgated after independence and after our liberation war, and where equality is a foundational principle. Elimination of discrimination is also a foundational principle. So religious views can be taken into account, but of course the principle of equality has to be paramount there. And I think that the kinds of demands we're seeing raised, we saw one raised in court recently where a group tried to argue that the women's reform recommendations were not only against the Constitution, but also against Islamic law and public sentiment. Now, those are matters that can be argued out, debated and discussed. They're not really matters that are relevant, I think, in terms of court review or judicial processes.
Barrister Sara Hossain, thanks very much for your input. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.